Okay, title of this what masterclass will kick it off is Shattering Ceilings, Women in Real Estate Leadership. We have a couple of people who are unfortunately not feeling good. Does seem to be that, forgive me, but shit is going around again in terms of sickness. So unfortunately, Sarah is not feeling well, and neither is Corey. I will introduce everybody. I have asked Kathleen to jump in because I love her and she's wonderful and been in the industry a long time. But joining us, we have Marty Reed, who's the COO of REcore. We have Celeste Starchild, the president of IGO, or InspectionGo, depending on how you choose to say it. And which do you prefer, Celeste? IGO or InspectionGo?
We just always say I go. It's easier.
Okay. All right. Jessica Edgerton, who's chief legal officer for Leading RE, and Kathleen is the VP of Industry Relations at Realtor.com. So thank you all. Let's get to it. So this topic is so near and dear to my heart. Really for such a long time. I remember when I first started going to conferences in the B2B side, and I wrote this on LinkedIn, I would be like, well, where are the women? Like, where are they? And they would have the same women come up over and over again. And actually, I was talking to Michael Saunders, who runs Michael Saunders Brokerage out of Florida about this. And it was Sherry. These are all wonderful women. So I say this respectfully, but they kept getting pulled up to the same panel. It was Michael Saunders, it was Sherry Chris, it was Dottie Herman, and as Celeste reminded me, it was Pam O'Connor. So they spoke over and over again. Some of those women have retired, some have not. But generically speaking, they were wonderful representatives, and I was grateful just to see them. But it wasn't, I do think there's starting to be some change, but it took a long time before those women weren't speaking for an industry that is majority women. And that always just kind of befuddled me because I started as a loan officer for 10 years. And I would run around in loan office, a lot of loan officers are women, a lot of agents are women, and then you get to the leadership level and suddenly it looks very different. So this is a topic that's important to me. So let's kick it off a little bit and talk a little bit about maybe some stats, sort of what sort of the makeup of the industry looks like today from a statistical point of view. So Jessica, I'm going to point to you because you're our representative statistician.
I don't have stats necessarily on the industry, although I think
we have 66%. I'll give you the one for the industry.
Yeah, give that. And
women, fair enough. Women represent the industry. 66% are sales agent, but only a fraction, like a very small percentage, are actually in leadership positions. I don't think this is actually something that is reported by NAR. By the way, one other thing, lest I forget, because we went a little long on the beaches, the rules of this thing are that we'll go as long as the conversation takes us. This is not an infomercial. And if you have questions in Q&A and you have stats that we don't have, please put them up. I do keep an eye on the Q&A. So on that note, how about women in business in general, Jessica?
Yeah, so just generally, these are, don't quote me on these, but recent stats from reliable sources across all industries, and I think this is US based, men still occupy 75% of senior manager roles of S&P 500 companies. Only 8% of those companies are women. So I think those are two really sort of compelling statistics to sort of set the baseline of what we're looking at.
So just generically speaking, let's go around the panel and say I was personal about my experience. Marty, I'll start with you because you were last on beaches. What has been your experience? And we are largely talking about, women and that for now, but what has been your experience generically speaking in the industry, like in this particular venue?
Well, I'm starting my 35th year in this industry, if you can imagine that. And it started out by me applying for they called them association executives or directors at the time.
AEs.
For MLSs. Some of them are still called AEs, right? I can say by the time I left Cooperative Arkansas Realtors Multiple Listing Service, there was a CEO role, which I occupied at that time. So, but, even then that was in 1990. And, I had multiple interviews with both the executive committee and the board of directors. And I remember sitting there waiting to go into a interview with the board of directors. And I saw a woman walk in and I recognized her. And she was actually my builder's wife. And I was in the process of having a house built. And so I come to find out after the fact, they asked her before they brought me in, how could I afford to build a new home? As a woman,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
Not really knowing whether I was married or, engaged or involved with anyone, so you can just imagine at that time period, someone applying for that job and then that being part of the topic of conversation preceding it, that was, of value. And then the interview itself was dated, right? Because during that conversation with the entire board, and there was probably 15 people in the room, and the youngest male in the audience asked me if I was married.
Yeah.
And everybody starts going, you can't ask her that. And, it was all of that. So just kind of dates you back. That was my first entry into this marketplace. And, even to the extent that there were questions asked in my executive committee interview, such as, I'll never forget this older gentleman asked me how I would respond or react if he asked me to get him a cup of coffee. And my response to him was, I repeated his name and I said, if I were getting myself a cup of coffee, I would be more than happy to get you a cup of coffee. And if you were getting a cup of coffee, I would hope that you would get me one as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you for
So
that.
that's my first entry into the market, right? And so that was 15 years.
Any different today?
I don't necessarily get asked to get a cup of coffee, but maybe to share
I teed you up for that perfectly.
Share a glass of tequila, or
Can you go get the tequila, which somehow seems far more palatable.
Yes.
All right. What about you, Celeste?
So I've been in the industry for 20 plus years. So when I came into the industry, same women that you mentioned were, sort of on the stages. I remember going to a Gathering of Eagles event and, sitting in the back of the room, I counted how many women were in the audience that I could spot just looking around. And it was, countable on one or two hands, hundreds and hundreds of men in leadership, mostly at brokerage firms. And the number of women were, you could just, I could count them. I mean, just the fact that I could count them. And like I said, it was probably 7 or 8 in the entire room of men. So that was really obvious to me. I was very oblivious. That's the only explanation I have to, kind of how I just kind of plowed forward. And I think I confounded the challenge that I had as a woman with the challenge that I also had being about 25 at this time. I was
just thinking you were like 27. You were young.
I was very young. And so I think I knew I was different. And I just kind of had nothing to lose, is really the best way I can describe it, and just kind of plowed forward with that. But there has been change over time. It's been slow, and it's been incremental, and a lot of different influences have brought that change. Some of it has been from within the industry, some without the industry.
Yeah, we'll get to all that.
Yeah, we'll get to all that. But 2 things. I wanted to mention another stat that's relevant to the industry stats. The 60-some% of women making up the real estate industry. Something that I got information on from Woman Up is that in 2022, men reported a 20% earnings over women in real estate. So that's in the same roles. We're not talking about men in brokerage positions versus women in agent positions. We're talking about men and women in the same roles, self-reporting a 20% earnings gap. And I know earnings gaps, but I just wanted to make sure I shared that because it blew my mind.
Well, good. That's a good one. Thank you. We'll hold on money for a minute too, because God, well, that's a big rabbit hole and we do want to go down it. But Kathleen, on that note, I do feel like that's a good one for you to go with money, because I do know like you have held a variety of positions and really come up the ladder. And I mean, and definitely have probably, kind of that's been, something that you've had to deal with a little bit. So how about for you?
For me,
I'm tactfully trying to be careful here and when I say this for you at various positions.
I know. Well, I actually started into this industry, into the workforce later because I did
But you were an agent
choose.
first too, right?
Yeah, I
So
chose to, raise my children. And then at, 30 plus years, I got a real estate license and did that for probably 8 or 9 years. And then I started working for Celeste. She hired me. And at that point, I was like, wow, why would you want to hire me? I know nothing about technology. This is a technology company. And having been, an agent or broker, she said, that's exactly what we need, somebody that knows what they need and knows how to talk to them and to be able to promote our product. So from there, it kind of evolved into helping the List Hub platform at that point grow, and that meant getting new MLSs on board. So that's when I started working on more of the MLS side of things. But I can tell you, it was great having, a female boss. I grew up with 7 brothers, and I grew up in a family where everybody mowed the grass, everybody folded mom's laundry, everybody did dishes after dinner. So I never, I guess, noticed until I did see, well, gosh, the people, around me doing kind of all the work aren't the people that are getting all of the recognition and getting the opportunity to get on stage, or, and it was, why are we doing this, and making somebody else look good all the time? How can we make ourselves look better? And get that recognition. So it's a struggle
well,
that I have personally experienced, I would say.
yeah, I think you said that very nicely. So and I do think for those of us who've had women bosses, it's a luxury, candidly.
And I wouldn't, just say that
Doesn't
for
always
myself.
necessarily, make it better per se, just because you're female to female, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think if we, if you have a good one, and we both have, you're lucky. So what about you, Jessica?
I came over from real estate, from legal, obviously, and especially as Marty was sort of
Well,
talking
that's a
about,
whole nother webinar,
it's a
Jessica.
whole other can of worms, but it's also, I think there's a lot of sort of crossover experiences because it
Interesting.
is, it's a historically very, very male dominated, especially in
Yeah,
leadership positions.
yeah, that's true too.
I was told in law school, this is 2000 and early 2000s, you will have a much more successful career as a litigator if you wear a skirt, Jessica, for example. And so this is, it's something that's across all industries. I have been very lucky to work for the last 7 years for a company that actually had, up until shortly after my arrival, Pam O'Connor, actually one of the iconic women that we
Right.
were talking about,
Yeah.
leading the helm there. And her culture and legacy has carried over. Paul Boomsma, obviously, is our CEO now, and is extremely cognizant of, lifting up and creating a great culture and space for women. I'm one of his C-suite, and our COO, Kate Reisinger, is also. So I think it's up to, the folks that are currently in charge to really look for opportunities to lift up.
I do think I do think there are lots of men in the industry who've lifted women up
Oh,
and who have made it their mission to promote women for sure. If we start naming them, we'll leave out the ones we should have named, so we won't do it, but we all
No,
have them in our heads, who have been beneficial, who have, the best way I can think to say, be recognized that being the only female executive in the room, which has been my experience numerous times and for numerous years, is not always fun, and is not always an easy place to be. So that kind of puts us into, I think Jessica's going to be happy we bring this topic up because she mentioned yesterday, is imposter syndrome, which is, so when we talk about the problem, we've identified there's an issue. And now we talk about sort of why is there an issue? Is it the issue us or them? And I hate to put it that way, but relatively speaking, just for ease of description, are we holding ourselves back, by believing we can't? Or are we also, like basically just, we're doing it to ourselves, or or do we just need to change the makeup, and it's about what people see, what they, ineffable words of Serena, people see what they believe, they can do it. By the way, I did get a very nice comment from somebody who was an MLS exec, so please continue to put them up there. She said in 2008, when I interviewed for my first MLS job, I was also asked if I was married and had children. I had to tell the hiring men that they were not allowed to ask me that question. So there you have it. So feel free to share stories. This is a community conversation. So generically speaking, thoughts, Jessica, imposter syndrome, to be doing it to ourselves,
I
et
think
cetera, et
there is
cetera.
I think there's osmosis that happens. And I think a lot of that comes from a lot of the messaging, very subtle and not so subtle, that we as women experience societally about what we're capable of, what our stereotypical roles are, and where we belong. I think that message is still prevalent culturally, and in some cases in terms of built-in infrastructure to our professions. But we are the ones who accept that. And this is by no means victim blaming, right? That's not what we're saying, but we need to recognize that in ourselves, first of all. Second of all, I think that all of us sitting here as leaders now, it's up to us to recognize that we may be cognizant of glass ceilings, but I read recently a phrase that I had not seen before, and maybe I'm an ignoramus and it's been out there for a while, but it's the broken rung. The idea of the broken rung, which is what women face. So
What is that?
the idea is that the way to get up to sort of that glass ceiling level is by climbing the ladder, right? And a lot of women experience a broken rung. The statistics, and I don't have them right in front of me, I'm
Is
sorry.
it just another term for the ceiling? Is it like
No,
just...
this is about we need to separate the idea of women being blocked from those senior level positions and recognize the statistics on lower level and entry level managerial positions, which is so much where it starts. I think that very
I
often
see.
is
That's
where, and I'm
interesting.
wrapping it back into imposter syndrome. That's where imposter syndrome is really, really detrimental. And I think that's where a lot of societal messaging comes in as well. There are not enough women in entry-level managerial positions right now. And so all of us as men, and there aren't enough role models. The stats that I said before, 8% of CEOs are women. So it's all up to all of us to, for the women that my direct reports who are women, I talk openly with them about imposter syndrome and about the all of the tools that they have within themselves to feel confident and to feel playful in their spaces. And so
that's very interesting, because I think really what you're pointing out to, that we had not really talked about in the prep call or considered, is this idea that, like if you're in a mid-level position, yeah, you're going to have to scrap a little bit or fight to get further up. And yeah, you're breaking the glass ceiling per se, right? But you have to get on the ladder at all, is really what you're saying. And if we're not giving people the opportunity to, like, for especially in the B2B side of the industry, I got into it because of family. Like, let's face it, Celeste gave Kathleen a break. Lots of agents would love to get into the B2B side in truth, but are they taking that opportunity? And then are we putting them and giving them that path forward, to your point? I see you, Celeste, go for it.
I think it's both, and there's an interesting study done at Hewlett Packard about promotions within the company, and the study basically learned that women applied for promotions when they met 100% of the qualifying criteria for the job, and men applied for the promotions when they met 60% of the qualifying criteria for the job. So I believe it's both. Leaders need to provide more opportunities and pave those pathways forward for women. But I also think that women need to apply for the job when they meet 60% of the qualifying criteria. And this is a quote from a novelist, E.L. Doctorow, and he said, it's like driving a car at night. You never see farther than your headlights, but you can make the whole trip the whole way. And I think, when I think about myself being that 27-year-old in the industry, I think I'm not joking.
What, you didn't study real estate in college, or?
I was young and dumb and plowing forward. Like I said, I was young, I had nothing to lose. And I think that benefited me, just a little bit of oblivion to what was going on around me. And I think that, if women could adopt a little bit more of that oblivion in light of the challenges that they face, that can help. It's part of the recipe.
What about you, Marty?
Well, we do have to lift each other up. But I think there's also a couple of forms of imposter syndrome. And going back to what Jessica said earlier about, you would get farther if you wore a dress, right? When I interviewed back in the 1990s, I did all that, right? You wear the dress, you wear the heels, you do this, you do that. Have any of you seen me in a dress ever in your lifetime? And you probably never will again unless it's on a dare. But the truth of it is I felt like I had to present a certain persona of myself as a woman to get into, the industry. And once I was in there, then I just allowed my skill set and what I was able to accomplish to speak for itself, and then felt more comfortable just being who I was in my own skin.
All right, well then I'm gonna open the door to, we got a really nice another comment. I won't read it exactly, but I'll summarize if that's okay for my anonymous attendee. And Kathleen, you're gonna hate me for this, especially since you jumped in last minute. But the elephant in the room is a little bit like also like whether or not I think this believing you can do it, giving people opportunities, the wrong. Let's talk about the elephant in a little bit about, are we blocked by, the fact that we think not we think we have children, we might have children, or we think we might have children, or we have complications that prevent us from doing as good a job as somebody that is not a quote unquote stay at home. These days, a lot of men are stay at home. So that's changing. And I was thinking of you, Kathleen, a little bit, not only because it was your turn, but I was wondering, I think you had small children still when you interviewed for the position at List Hub, right? Because I know your kid is not that old. So, right.
My youngest was around 5, I think. 5? My youngest is 20.
So I think they were like small. You had small kids.
Yeah, when I started as an agent, they were the youngest was 3. By the time I started and having to go into an office and that kind of thing every day,
I had little kids when I was a law
more like
officer.
9.
I had 3, yeah. So I do think, like, I'll tell you a funny thing. When I interviewed for a job, my first B2B side job as a loan officer, I was very pregnant. And talk about being naive, right, Celeste? I had no idea that that was something they weren't supposed to ask me about. So I was in an office with a guy who was like, "Oh, you're pregnant? No, we don't hire pregnant women." And I come from a long line of lawyers, many of them women, Jessica. And I went home and went, "I don't know. Can I say that?" And they're like, no. But it also made me appreciate the man who did hire me even more pregnant a couple months later and who didn't care. And by the way, I was his top salesperson. So good for him. And if anything, I did it because I knew then that he was able to look at it differently. And and I understood the opportunity. So, Kathleen, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but did you feel like you were hindered when you were doing it, or was it just necessity rules?
No, I actually feel like, my choice to not enter the workforce in a way that might take me away from what I wanted to be my primary role at that time was a personal choice. Yeah, it was just totally a personal choice. There may have been points, even when they were older as teenagers, where contemplating a job that would have me traveling and not there. That's one thing that you get one
Well,
shot.
that raises a question. Are women making that choice more than men? And I think that's changing as time goes, because the paradigm of who stays home or who is on the first call when the kid is sick is changing.
So,
I think it is
about 50-50 now that, they just decide maybe who's the bigger income earner or who is
look at paternity leave.
Wants to do that role more. Yeah. Maternity and paternity leave. Yeah.
Well, right. But paternity leave is now considered, almost as long. It's not quite as long, but it's similar. I mean, companies have no choice. So I guess that does go into the elephant in the room. Like, let's talk about the other elephant in the room. Like, are women more just afraid? So first of all, like, if we're talking about sort of blockers, we're talking about that we are young and we need to see the opportunities and see the rungs and take it. As Celeste said, apply. As Jessica said, get people to apply and then give them that path forward, right? We have to not see what we're doing today. Yes, there are choices. Like I made the same choice as Kathleen. But you can, like Kathleen, even though you made an agent, I was a loan officer. We both eventually ended up going B2B.
Mhm.
So maybe, so it's not like we're both here, so we found a path,
Yeah.
What does it feel like to the group about, are we afraid of how we're perceived both in front of other women and with men if we're perhaps a parent or not? Like, does that hold us back? I mean, that's, yes, imposter syndrome, but it's a little different. Does that hold us back a little bit? Jessica?
I'll take, I think there are sort of two pieces here. I mean, I don't know if anybody noticed, but my 5-year-old daughter is walking around in the background here. And it's so much, it was a gift that was given to us by COVID. Nobody even blinked, I don't think. But to the point earlier, I was pregnant with her when I joined leading RE, and Paul knew and was just like, all right, we'll make it work. How are we going to make it work? And it was so beautiful and wonderful. So I do want to say that it was it's a rarity. And there's so many stories like what you experienced, Audrey. The fear that I have experienced, and I think that I'm not quite answering your question, so maybe somebody else on the panel will do a better job. But one of the fears that I wanted to bring up is sort of around, and this is an issue that I don't know, but a can of worms here, but it's an issue that we grapple with across all industries, but especially in real estate, we've grappled with in the last few years. When we are a industry of networkers, of meeting people, of community, of getting to know each other at cocktail parties, etc. And women to a different level have to have their guard up, and some of those sort of fear factor flags have to be up for protection purposes. That to me
Yeah.
is a detriment to us being able to advance in this kind of industry.
I'm far more intimidated by other women than I am the men.
Well, I leave
That's just that's just honest,
for a lot of, for me, especially younger, I feel like more of a tough, just I can handle it now more. But women need to, a lot of women leave events on the early side once they see the cocktails flowing more heavily. That cuts off networking opportunities for them,
Well,
right?
do not take us down the Me Too rabbit hole.
I'm not.
You in the rabbit holes. What that the industry used to be like when the cocktails flowed 20 years ago.
What I'm saying though is guards need to be up, and whether, no matter what that situation is, we need to be aware of that, right? And it's another situation of lifting each other up. So I'll stop there.
No, but it's true. But
I'm
teasing
a real
you.
Fear.
It is a fear. Somebody we were talking about on the prep call trained me on no good business is done after midnight in the real estate industry. And for the most part, that was true. But an awful lot of business was done after midnight in the real estate industry for a very long time. I mean, I could do a whole masterclass on God help you, you're sober in the real estate industry. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's not actually an easy place to be. You're not sure if it's harder than being a woman. We have some great comments coming in. I do want to say I love this engagement. Please keep posting, please. These are really heartful to me. And one of the things that somebody raised was, what do you do when your male counterparts are taking credit for your ideas? Oh my goodness, never happened to me. But how do you deal with, and I don't want to be that specific, but maybe the better way to say it is, how do you make sure that because another comment was that you're not, and this I understood completely. I got over this about 10 years ago, but I had to consciously, you're waiting to speak because you don't want to look stupid. This is, again, more imposter syndrome. And we'll dovetail in a minute to the solution side of things as opposed to continuing to vet. But I feel like we're touching a vein, and I love that people feel that they can comment on this.
So Audrey, one thing I would like to say based on what Jessica was talking
do it.
I think that we do have some women in the industry that I'm uncomfortable with how they present themselves, because I think they make the women in general look bad, because they think they have to act a certain way in front of men constituency that they wouldn't otherwise act that way.
Oof. Yeah. I'm
You know,
not
so I
touching that with a
find a
10-foot
little
pole, except that I
discomfort.
100% agree.
Yeah, I find a little discomfort in that for me, you know, personally, is like, would you act that way if this group of men weren't standing around?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's
So,
incredibly accurate. Um, and I think the good news is, the only thing I'll say about that is I think the good news is they're not the majority. I
That's
think
true.
they are the minority. I think the whole point of where we started this, Marty, was that they were the majority. And I think, because it was so small and that was the only way you got forward. To your point, you had to wear a skirt, you had to, you had to play the game.
Yeah.
You had to drink with the boys. You had to not be offended by anything they say. You had to wear clothes that were acceptable, right? And play the game. You just did. And now you don't have to as much anymore. So let's answer the quick question about what do you do about making sure your ideas are heard? Because frankly, that's men or women. So because I got asked that, let's do that. And then let's dovetail into a more positive note about solutions and how we can make change in a positive way. Although I think we've talked a little bit about that too. So what do you do, Celeste? I know you've never been in the situation where where somebody took credit for your idea, especially when you were younger and coming up.
Mhm.
Um, just
Been possible. It's not always been possible, but I have found myself in situations where I realized that if I didn't share my perspectives more publicly, that I was not going to get credit for them. There would be a bad egg. There would be a bad egg who was basically, funneling all of my ideas as their own and relaying those, outwardly or to senior management or whatever it might have been. And I realized I needed to, and there's creative ways to do it. At the time, whether it's in a meeting and you're saying it out loud as opposed to one-on-one, or whether it's, a Slack channel that you create and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. But sometimes you have to do creative things, and because you have to take credit for your work. You have to take credit for your ideas. You deserve the credit for your work. You deserve the credit for ideas. And yes, it's harder. But if somebody's not giving you that credit, then what choice do you have? I think an HR person would say, address directly with that person. And
Right.
depending on the situation, maybe that could work. But I think
now you're sounding like a president of a company.
but yeah, go public, go loud and go public.
Loud and proud, as I taught my kids. What about you, Kathleen? Because I know you've been in this situation.
I would say don't be overtalked. You
Don't
can
be over what?
overtalked,
Uh-huh.
interrupted, at which point what you're trying to relay seems to be, coming from somebody else. And they, catch wind of a little bit of your idea and then they run with it when it wasn't their idea to begin with. I would say, maybe happens sometimes. So just continue on and push through, because it's like Celeste said, it's your idea and you deserve the credit. So, do whatever it takes to take it. Don't be quiet about it.
All right, I'm just moving up my visuals queue here, Jessica, or people call you Jessica. Sorry about that.
Jessica,
Okay.
Frank, whatever. So playing off a little bit of what both Kathleen and Celeste were saying, a couple things here. First of all, I think I tend to be collaborative. And so I will phrase things as, well, what if we did this or that? And I think even just some phrasing of, here's my idea, and take ownership of that sort of from the front end, first of all. And, second of all, I think modeling, doing actually what I just did, sort of playing off what Celeste and Kathleen just said. When I'm talking to a group, when I'm talking to my team, when I'm talking to my boss, I'll say, I want to bring up an idea that Kate had yesterday. And I'm extremely overt about giving credit for every single thing that comes out of my mouth that didn't
Yeah, I am too.
generate from me. Because I think modeling that will shame people a little bit when they don't do it.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I agree with that. What about you, Marty?
Well, there's probably a lot of cases, but the most relevant and recent, I think, is, Art Carter is one of those guys who lift women up and who empower them to do a job. And he's the one person that will say, and the best compliment I get from him all the time is that I'm the only one that he has hired in, his lifetime that actually takes stuff off of his whiteboard. There's always stuff that gets added to it. But I, like Jessica mentioned, am quick and immediate to say it's not me, it's we. And I acknowledge the team. I acknowledge the ideas that came from the team. I acknowledge when their ideas have been the ones that have pushed all the things forward. And I think that's, that the collaborative approach I take, like Jessica does, those people should get credit for their ideas. They should be the ones getting credit. I'm getting credit on behalf of it from, my boss down. I want to make sure he hears this was their idea and that they know I shared that with him as well.
Honestly, I think both are true. Okay. I think you have to be loud and proud. I
Yeah.
do think you have to stand up for yourself. I do. I think if people don't, I'm not saying every idea has to be yours and you have to be really picayune about it, but I think there are moments that it's important that you're heard. And I think you just choose wisely. And no more than I would say to a man, choose wisely. And I also think that you have to model, and I think both are completely feasible in the same person, in the same organization, in the same meeting, which is to share credit and to lift up by way of this conversation, lift up the people under you by noting their ideas, male or female or otherwise. And I do
Well, and
think
I would only I would
that
suggest
does engender collaboration and it does engender role modeling, but you also got to speak up for yourself for sure.
Well, and I'd also suggest in handling someone who takes credit for your ideas is if they're going to do it, then make it very overt that they need to follow through with that idea.
Well, right.
What are you
But the
going to do
truth of it
about
is,
that?
look, the reality of it is to this person who wrote it, it all comes around. Marty and I were talking about this yesterday, I think, on the phone. Put your head down, do good work. At the end of the day, you have to look yourself in the mirror and know that you operated with integrity and you did good work. You spoke up for yourself and you were collaborative. That's all you have, is your reputation.
I think there are
So
things organizations can do to create a culture that makes it harder for people to take ideas.
that's
So I
interesting.
don't know how many of you guys have been in the meetings where the loudest person wins. And I think of that as a fairly masculine way to lead and make decisions. And I have been in those meetings and they make me crazy. And sometimes, you can fight through and say, excuse me, I wasn't finished, and finish your thought. But that's no fun way to work. Just little things like, in Europe, they do this. It's the hand raising culture, and whether it's Zoom or whether it's Google
That's
Meets
right.
or for
That's
your
true.
platform, you can't talk unless you raise your hand, and just ensuring that everybody gets a chance to talk, or scratch pads and using other formats, which kind of draw out ideas from people who might not be as confident speaking up or as
That's
confident
true.
up in a group of people that are more senior than they are, or the only woman in a group of all men, or whatever the case might be. If you create a document that's a scratch pad and everybody can write and contribute, you might get more and more better and more diverse ideas through those types of channels. So I think there are things that organizations can do to change the culture within an organization to open up those doors and opportunities for everybody to be heard. Really.
Yeah, I think those are well said. I do think it's a culture thing. I do. And to I think Jessica's point, we all have a responsibility to create that culture from the bottom up and top down. And you can model it, so I think it all matters. Let's talk about, we have like a few minutes left, like 10 minutes left. Like, let's talk about like what's happening today in the industry. I'm happy to talk about various organizations like Renew or Woman Up, or I think there was a fire from way back when Celeste and I were reminiscing about. I think they're still going around.
Bernice Ross is the OG of women's group.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I know.
They're
That's true.
they're having an event right now, right as we speak.
Nice.
in
So
Arizona.
are those organizations, and we don't need to talk about each one specifically, I don't get in trouble. Are those organizations, have those organizations been contributive? I'm sure the answer is yes. And so again, maybe that's a stupid question, but or what more could we be doing, maybe is to say, I think these organizations help. I do. I think they've given some sense of community. I don't think they're huge though. And I mean it respectfully, but when I started in this topic with Marty and Sarah and a few, so like Sarah Fogg of Prime and people like that, right? I was at Clarity and I hadn't been back in the MLS community in a while. And I started meeting with a lot of men and women, but also, I was like, wow, there's a lot more women in leadership positions on the MLS side. Remember Kathleen and I talked to you about it too. And I was like, are you guys talking to each other? And I was amazed how many didn't know each other. That really surprised me. That there wasn't this community of women at the MLS leadership level that weren't sort of a little more, not aligned isn't the right word, but friends. So that's kind of where this whole thing started to germinate for me again. So what more could we be doing? I guess is really the question. I applaud the organizations that are there and are trying, but what more could we be doing? And what maybe they could be doing? I don't know. Go
I'll
ahead,
just,
Celeste. Jump in.
Sure, I'll just say, I think that the most powerful thing in my mind is what leaders, men and women who are in leadership positions, can do within their own organizations. I think, setting the tone, setting the culture, and for us, for example, I would just skip right ahead. I would love to see organizations, publish data on pay equality for their organizations, for example.
Oh, right. I forgot about that. Thank you for bringing that back up.
We
Yeah.
analyze it. We haven't published ours, but we have analyzed it, and we do it from two perspectives. One is pay equality. And just full transparency, in our organization, we do pretty good on pay equality as long as you take out the engineers. So the lack of women in technology is, related issue that is making it hard for our organization to have pay equality across levels. But then there is level equality. So do you have the same number of men and women in, each of those management, from supervisor to manager to director to VP to executive level roles? Do you have, relative equal number of men and women in those roles? And just, internally monitoring those things. It's illuminating. You learn a lot. And I think if we could get to the point where everybody is doing that, that would help. But it's all those little things. Women don't, need help building that confidence. What can organizations do to help with that? Open up micro moments for women to shine, whether that be, a project to gain confidence in a new skill of things that, something that they had never had an opportunity to work on before. It doesn't have to be a full-on promotion to create an opportunity for a talented woman to build confidence in a new skill set. It could be project-based, it could be something else, but creating those alternative working circumstances for women who are balancing a family with their career life. The example I'll give you, comes from my own life. When I had my daughter, who is now 6, I was at Realtor.com, and after I got back from maternity leave, I worked full-time for a little while and started to realize it was a little much for her young age. And she was about 9 or 10 months old, and I went to the company and negotiated a change to my work, where I basically reduced everything by 20%, reduced my working hours by 20%. I took Fridays off. I reduced my salary by 20%. I did not have any decrease in my responsibilities. I mean, except for the amount of work I could get done, obviously, or, my title or my direct reports. None of that was changed. I give the team there, the chief product officer at the time, who blessed that, a lot of credit. But circumstances like that allowed me to continue to do amazing work for Realtor.com, and at the same time navigate my desire to spend more time with my kids. So it's those small those aren't really that small things. They're really big things that make a big impact on people's lives and will really help.
The elephant in the room, pay equality, right? So that's a biggie. So Jessica, I'll toss it to you. So 2 things: you can tackle pay equality, or you can tackle what more we can be doing, because or both, real quick.
I want to leave room for Kathleen and Marty, so I'm not going to tackle pay equality. That's, I think Celeste had some great stats on that. I think though, I'd like to play off a little bit more. And Audrey, you're never going to invite me back on the show. I'm like the queen of rabbit holes here, but I promise I'll be very, very careful. You mentioned all of the sort of the women focused, organizations and societies that are out there. I think they're great, but I agree with Celeste that it has to start at home, right? I think one of the places where those communities, though, those sort of external cross-company communities can really come into play is with the idea of mentorship, which is crucial, especially for folks who are entering into the market and the industry, and role modeling, right? Just walking into a room of a bunch of powerful women has an effect where maybe, to again Celeste's stat earlier, like 60% of your skill set there, maybe women can start recognizing, oh yeah, I can do that with 60%, and then I can use the headlights in the dark. Where the rabbit hole is I think that we need to look beyond, though, and I'll stop here, Audrey. We need to look beyond just the women organizations and also look at some of our real estate minority.
Oh, no, you're good.
Organizations. Okay.
Yeah,
I
no,
think
you said it so brilliant yesterday. I said it before you got on call, like intersectional support. And we
totally.
are talking about, lots of other minority communities, people of color, the LGBTQ community, and I always
Yep.
our queer community. We're talking about, lots of different communities. I think just so people know, the reason I was worried about the rabbit hole a little bit is just because, we're all a minority of some sort, right? In some form or another. And I don't want to leave anybody out, in
I get
truth.
it. Yeah. But I think
this is not an easy industry if you don't fit the paradigm. Somebody put up a comment that I really liked that said, that I'll sort of use to kind of dovetail off this, that said something to do with that we're just, that we're changing people's mindsets, like keep in mind that sometimes we're just talking about that, sorry, I'm looking for the comment and the word they use because I liked it, but suffice to say, like, there are some, this is an older industry, we could talk about ageism, but don't get me going down that rabbit hole. How age is perceived in this industry as well. And I do think even more so for women than for men. I do. I can feel the perception of me changing as I get older in this industry as a woman, and that may or may not be applicable, forgive me, but to an older man. We got an awful lot of older men walking around in this industry. And maybe not so much on the female side. I don't know. Maybe that's a choice. I don't know, in fairness. But I do think it is about intersectional support. So I think your point, and I don't want to speak for you, just is to say, look, if we're going to change things, we also have to acknowledge other minority groups in this industry and support one another.
Yeah. And recognize that, women are everywhere. And if we're not embracing women across all communities, we're hurting ourselves as well as women who aren't included in what we're doing. So it's crucial for us to recognize all of the intersectionality of the communities.
I agree. What about you, Kathleen?
Are we talking about pay inequality, or
you get to pick? You can pick the rabbit hole you want.
I would say, again, I see a lot of the people that I deal with, when things are getting done, and there's many women that are in more of a COO role, the operations roles.
It used to be women were in HR and marketing.
Yeah, and that's great that they're in a COO role, but why aren't they're perfectly capable of holding a CEO title as well. And maybe in some cases even in more so, because they know, everything that's going on. And maybe it's allows that CEO to be more of the figurehead, but I think at a certain point I would definitely like to see more women being recognized as at that CEO level. And not within my own organization or speaking for myself. I'm just talking about throughout the industry. I am kind of amazed at this point that I know who's getting stuff done and I know who knows their stuff. And it's basically, why aren't they in that role? Kind of makes me scratch my head sometimes.
Yeah, actually, I think Realtor.com does really well
Yeah.
with it. So, I know they're
Yeah.
not inclusive. They do a good job on that front. What about you, Marty? You want to go down the intersectional rabbit hole or
Well,
the pay
yeah,
equality
I'm
one?
going to steer clear of the pay equality because,
Okay, I thought you were going to say the exact opposite.
that'll just take us down even more rabbit holes, right? And
Okay,
I don't know
fair enough.
what the problems are, but there was a couple of things that I was thinking about as Jessica was speaking, and I recently, not long ago, joined Lesbians Who Tech, right? And they have a summit every year. Unfortunately, it falls right in the middle of this other engagements that we have in the industry, and so I struggle with that because I really want to attend that. I see the women who are speaking there because we talk about women in technology. And that's been a big driver of mine. Back at my days with Black Knight, now ICE, I spent a lot of time trying to mentor and encourage women to get into the technical space. And I was very fortunate before departing there to have seen a couple of women come through my engineering department, right? And see how they flourished when you gave them the confidence and the level that they could do just as well, if not better. And we're relying on them to do more than we were, engineers that had been there many, many years. And so, we started a mentorship group there. So when I did this recent podcast with Renew and Lauren Martin, which I enjoyed, I had people in my own sphere working for me and through me with, at REcore go, I really didn't know those things about you. And, can we have some kind of mentor, organization within REcore? And I thought, well, why not? And can we encourage more women to get into tech? Can we give them, lift them up and give them the confidence? Because they're more than capable. To what Kathleen was saying, that, what is the saying behind every good man is a good woman who gets it done, right? And there's a lot of truth to that. And they're not all about taking the credit or whatever. We do need to speak up more for that. But it's showing them you can do this too.
Yeah,
And getting more women in tech.
and
That's
it's
kind of what
yeah, I think you're right. And I try not to promote or have this being a Local Logic has been phenomenal. One of the best organizations I've ever worked for, in terms of equality for women and things like that. It's incredible in that way. And probably why I have been here so long and will continue to be here. I also thought Realtor had a built-in mentorship program. Local Logic, I don't know if we're quite large enough. Realtor.com with like over 2,000 people had a really nice mentorship program, and I both participated as a mentee and as a mentor, and it was nice. Uh, and it did create that sort of maybe to your point, Marty, the mentorship programs do create intersectional support because the support that people are looking for, often I'd have devs who want to get into sales, right? Sometimes you I'll never forget, I had a customer service guy in West Virginia who's like, I would like to be in sales, I've had two tech devs approach me about being in sales in my career. So, you just don't know. You don't know where that intersectionality lies, really, right? You just don't. You don't know where people need support and mentorship and role modeling. We're about out of time. I have had more comments on this one than I've had in quite a long time, maybe since like my first masterclass. So I really, really, and they're so heartful and so wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you for joining. A lot of people will listen after. So we had a nice number of attendees, but I know a number of people watch the webinars, and we'll get a recording. Feel free to send it to your friends. It's a really important topic. Find any of us afterwards, please. I personally will throw myself out there as happy to mentor anybody at any time, in any way, shape, or form. How about that? So find me if you need me, is what I'll always say. So thanks to my panelists. Thank you for joining, especially to Kathleen at the last minute. So special thanks, but all of you have very valuable time, and thank you for spending it with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Go to the
everybody.
beach. Enjoy the beach. See, thank you, everybody.